morning. It's Thursday, and we are here at the World Economic Forum in Davos. I'm Edie Lush, Hub Culture Morning News Show. Really pleased with our schedule coming up, but let me give you a little recap of what is going on outside on the streets in Davos. Today, U.S. President Donald Trump is set to address the forum via video link, eagerly anticipated by attendees all around the world, and I will say along the streets of Davos. We've had a mixed reaction to the advent of President Donald Trump. We might be speaking about that with our guests coming up. European leaders have been expressing concerns over economic challenges, some describing the situation as peak pessimism. NATO chief Mark Rutte has called for increased support for Ukraine, emphasizing the need for sustainable peace with some and full NATO membership for the nation. We've also heard Zelensky asking for peacekeepers to come to the country. And of course, amidst all the high-level discussions, we've had some climate disruptions in Davos. Climate activists making their voices heard by painting Amazon's base here in Davos green and disrupting helicopter landings, highlighting the pressing issue of environmental responsibility. We have heard from the Oxfam CEO here in the studio the rising tide of concern, and I would in fact describe it as rage against the increasing disparity between the super rich and those who remain below the poverty line. Joining us today to discuss a variety of issues, including this issue around peak pessimism, we have some fantastic guests. Sarah Backhouse, Executive Director of World 50. Thanks very much for coming along.
Thank you. I like to be linked to peak pessimism all the time, so it's off to a good start.
Peak optimism.
That's right.
We've also got Roselyn Chambrier. She's the CEO of Onze Capital and an absolute champion for Africa's industrial growth. We've also got Yat Su. He is the executive chairman of Animoca Brands and a blockchain pioneer. And Lauren Woodman, the CEO of DataKind, leveraging AI for social good. Sarah, let's get straight to it here. I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about your feelings here in Davos. The theme is collaboration in an intelligent age, but then there's a real sub-theme around trust.
There is.
Now I know this is something that you think deeply about. Give me your thoughts on, after a few days in Davos, what are your members in World 50 saying?
Indeed. Well, rebuilding trust is one of the sub-themes of Davos, and I think it's a very timely and telling one. Our members start the year with Ian Bremmer's Top Risks Report. This is a critical report. We have him every year, the most highly attended call. And the very first risk he cites is the G0 world.
G0 world, what's that?
It's a vacuum whereby traditional institutions have lost their way. IMF, UN aren't really providing the support that the global leaders need. The US, the world's dominant economy, is not really stepping up as a global leader, turning more inwards. Unilateralism is on the rise, and that's been seen with the Trump presidency. And other developed democracies, Germany, France, are not really filling that void either. So we're in a place where people are looking in, there's greater protectionism, greater looking after yourselves, and that's leaving a gap in global leadership.
It is something that I wonder if you see being filled by other members. So when I travel a lot to India, to the Middle East, they talk about this multipolar world and how regional powers, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, India, could step into the void. What do you see your members saying about
Indeed.
that?
I think from an economic perspective, certainly strong economies. China is meandering a little bit right now, but certainly is number 2 in the world. India, a rising economy. But however, again, there's no one stepping up to that global leadership role. I think there is a little bit of looking after one's own self. So, look, we'll see what 2025 holds, but still a big sense of a lack of global leadership.
And within that idea around trust, I know from the Edelman Barometer in past years, there has been this idea that global corporate leaders are the ones that do get trust, and they get trust from the members of their own companies and also the broader public. Is that still the case, or has that changed?
This changed. So,
okay.
yeah, Edelman Trust Barometer, it was its 25th year. And again, this is a great moment to set the scene for Davos. And trust in business, while it peaked in 2021 after COVID, where business stepped up and really looked after its employees, this is at a low. In fact, there was a dip in trust in government, in media, in business. The only glimmer of hope was NGOs that had some increased trust. But this has led to a really low level of trust, which is causing a very interesting phenomenon of a grievance-based society. So the public, distrustful of institutions, are aggrieved. They feel more discriminated against. They don't trust information. This, for me, is one of the scariest statistics. 66% can't tell the truth, but the difference between kind of fact and fiction. So we're left in a very distrustful society that we have to pull out from.
A little bit of a trust vacuum, you might say.
There is a trust vacuum.
I wonder what your members are saying, and tell me first of all who your members are. I
Yes.
should have asked that at the beginning.
Absolutely. So our members are CEOs and C-suite executives from the world's biggest companies and most trusted companies, I would argue. We have over 100 here at Davos. We convened them for a reception on Tuesday night, which is a little escape from the madness of Davos. And, you know, they're here across functions. So, of course, CEOs are highly represented. Divisional presidents, CFOs, chief comms officers are here in force, and also some new functions actually. Chief sustainability officers, chief marketing officers are showing up at a greater pace, and they are leaders, decision makers for their organizations. And look, frankly, they're also facing quite a few challenges. AI is by far the dominant theme here. So as leaders, how do you show up in an AI age? Employees are very concerned around AI, and you know, is it going to take your jobs? How do we upskill? How do we learn how to work with AI? All the geopolitical tension we mentioned. So it's quite a moment for leadership to step up, and well, 15 members included.
What thoughts on the new president? Is it divided based on geographically where they are based?
Yeah, I think it's mixed. I think that, look, Trump is going to be good for business. That's the overarching message. Obviously, there's regulations are going to fall to the wayside. Some can view this as incredibly positive. I heard from David Rubenstein, the co-founder of the Carlyle Group, who said expect more M&A activity, crypto markets loosening. So good time for business. Some of that is also worrying, right, with deregulation. Europeans, I think, are hoping that Europe will loosen some regulations to fuel innovations. You know, it was all listed out in the Draghi report about what Europe has to do. And I want to come back to the point about pessimism, because it's true, it has been a bit of a difficult moment for Europe, kind of sandwiched between the US and China, and facing aging demographics, increased innovation. There are some glimmers of hope. We had a call with a macroeconomist early this year that showed that there will be slight improvement in growth. I did just see the news of Trump's $500 billion investment in AI. So let's see if Europe can be inspired by that and step up and increase investments as well.
What about any thoughts on diversity, equity, and inclusion? Because we saw the announcement coming from Trump around eliminating all of those jobs within the federal government.
Yes.
Is that something that you'll see reflected in corporate as well?
This is a really interesting one, and I've talked to some of our CEOs here on the ground. Look, I think it is in a moment of being threatened. The language that people use around this, it's you know, we had green hushing, whereby people were afraid companies didn't want to step up and talk about their ESG programs for fear of retribution. Very much DE&I is an acceleration of that. So I think it's shown that having more diverse workforces do lead to greater diversity of thought and increased business performance. I think companies that have set those targets are going to stay the course. Will they be singing about it from the rooftops? Likely not, because that's a serious, it's something that they can be attacked from. So it's a very different age from just a few years ago.
I mean, this may be a bit simplistic, but I did have Adrian C. Smith from Fleischman Hillard in yesterday, who said it may not be called diversity, equity, and inclusion. It might be called something else, but what she sees is a lot of companies, as I know you see, when they embrace a more inclusive workforce, they do better.
Yes.
Profits improve.
Correct.
So I imagine your CEOs recognize this, and they'll find ways to make it happen in a different guise. Is that right, or am I being overly optimistic?
No, I think you're right. I think the narrative around what companies are doing is shifting. You've seen already high-profile examples of that, but those who have set those targets to decarbonise and to have more inclusive workforces, to your point, are staying the course.
Okay. Sarah, anything I haven't asked you want to make sure you say?
No, I think, look, the one thing, the glimmer of hope I see is trust in peer groups. That's what we at Well 50 Group like to convene and facilitate and create, because it's a crazy, unpredictable, complex world.
Yeah.
And having that safe space for our members to get together is something that we believe holds a great value.
Sarah, thank you very much for stopping by the Hub Culture Morning News Show. I'm Edie Lush. Stay with us. We'll be right back with our next guest. We are back, and I'm very pleased to be here with Roselyn Chambers. She is a champion for Africa's industrial growth and potential, and an interesting person to speak to about some of the misconceptions that a lot of the folks from, shall we say, the rich world still have. Before we get into some of those misconceptions, I want you to tell me what you see as the potential and what Africa's industrial growth could provide.
Thanks for having me first. I'm very happy to discuss this subject because, I think it's all about rebuilding trust. I think it's a key theme this year at the annual meeting. Africa by 2050 will have 2.5 billion people, and we need to create jobs, and we need to find ways also to train 1/3 of the future global labor force to supply and meet basically the global demand that is booming. So I would say that Africa has the human capital and the natural resources basically available to boost productivity and also reimagining growth, which will be vital for the global economy basically and the worldwide.
You were incredibly, you did some interesting work and impressive work around the San Pedro port project in Cote d'Ivoire, increased the GDP by 3%, created 1,000 jobs. What did you learn from that major infrastructure project?
So I think this is an example of what is possible to make in Africa. It was developed into public-private partnerships, whereby private investors came and signed with the government to build that port, basically, which is now allowing not only Cote d'Ivoire to increase its GDP annually, but to unlock a mining potential. It was a greenfield project, so done with local people, talent from scratch, and it also centers the country now, with the reshaping of the supply chains, with the green transition, because the mining products that are exported are mostly lithium, nickel. So basically, it's a way also to show that it is happening now in Africa, and it's basically, it will be vital for the welfare of the global economy.
So tell me how you dealt with the issue of risk for the investors. What reassurances did they need, and how did the government side of the equation help?
So mostly it's about, of course, having an ecosystem. So it can be the regulatory framework, basically incentives for investors to be sure, that there will be some stability, because those are long-term investment. So it's also about, and it's one of my core missions, so to show how to upskill or skill the local talent, because basically the idea is that you will not have access to a workforce that can meet the supply demand. So it's a critical time. We have 25 years now to act and basically to train a generation. And I'm really, here also to advocate to invest into education and vocational training, so that we are ready, for the 2050, when the global economy will need to basically use the labor force of Africa.
You are incredibly passionate about empowering women and girls, and through the Tsunami Foundation, you focused on providing educational opportunities for some of these underserved communities.
Yes.
Tell me what impact you've seen so far and what still needs to be done.
So, Eddie, we know that when you invest in women, they reinvest in the community. And we also know that, it's statistics, female founders, they are increasing the return on investment by 30%. So it's really about, training the girls from a very early age to the soft skills, to give them the tools, also mental health, the well-being, to have the assurance, basically, to develop some projects. Africa is, the region in the world with the most entrepreneurs, and most of the entrepreneurs are usually women. So it's all about equipping them with the skills so that they can contribute also to this sustainable industrialization.
What are those skills? What do they need most? You mentioned digital skills, AI, understanding.
Yes, digital literacy. So for that, you need to create the access. Critical thinking, I think it's important these days with the young generation, I think is privileged, because, we can construct this future with rapid innovation, which is AI, quantum computing, biotech. So we can boost productivity and increase the living standards of these people. So it's a critical moment for collaboration. There are some challenges, but it's very exciting for the young generations, especially the one coming from Africa.
I mentioned some of the misconceptions from international investors.
Yes.
Give me a success story that we could also point to besides Côte d'Ivoire.
Okay, so in Gabon, my home country, actually, we were able to act across the value chain. So the government developed industrial zones, which is actually a net zero industrial zone, whereby, it's about timber processing. So from the logs, they were able to process till now they are producing, they are the first exporter of plywood in Africa. They are doing particle boards. So basically, this generating a whole ecosystem to develop a whole cluster around one sector. And this is a success story, basically to create jobs and to leverage, on the basically leapfrogging from digital and analytics from other zones, region of the world, to basically, boost the local economy.
So I'd love to ask finally about regional cooperation. And I have heard when I've interviewed African entrepreneurs before, specifically from Kenya and Tanzania, but I imagine it's true not just there, that sometimes it's difficult to for cross-border collaboration because of the difference in regulation, because of seen rivalry, so we say. So I wonder what role you think the African Continental Free Trade Area might play in accelerating industrial growth and mitigating some of this rivalry.
Yeah, so I think it's a very interesting and important point. The FCTA is, if enforced, it would be a critical role. We are always joking as African people that, even to travel to another country, you need a visa where, it's just the next door. So I think, yes, it's all about collaborations, having common agendas. Not everybody can be a hub, not everybody, we need to find ways to collaborate, to have intra-trade also. So we are pushing also on this intra-trade agenda to basically, for one industry in one country serving another industry in another country. So I see it as a, instrumental way to trigger more trade, to promote trade, and to promote, the industrialization all across Africa and to serve the world, eventually.
Amazing, Roselyn. Thank you so much for stopping by the Hub Culture Morning News Show. Come back and tell us how you're getting on next year and what you've been involved in. We'll be back in just a moment. Trust seems to continue to be the theme here in Davos. We're going to move to trust through blockchain and cryptocurrency with Yatsu. Stay with us. We're going to continue our theme of trust, now exploring it through the lens of blockchain and cryptocurrency with Yatsu. He is the executive chairman of Animoca Brands and a crypto or a blockchain pioneer, shall we say. How are you today?
Very good. Thank you so much for having me.
So it has been a wild ride in crypto for the last few days, since just before the inauguration of the 47th president. You were already bullish around crypto before the inauguration, in fact, since it looked like Trump would win. What is your theory now? Are you still bullish?
Incredibly so, although I think it's been really fascinating to see, for those of you who know in the industry, Trump launched a meme coin, and that's really caused a ruckus in our industry. But I would say, if you think, for instance, what he did in terms of the some of the campaign promises, whether you like it or not, for instance, the pardon of Ross Ulbricht, that was something that a lot of people were speculating on whether he was actually going to do it. So these executive orders also in terms of, looking at certain types of actions that promote and sort of help the growth of the industry. Ueda coming in basically as acting chairman, again pro-crypto, Hester Peirce leading essentially a sort of a team to sort of look at pro-crypto regulation. And of course, Congress in and of itself is probably the most pro-crypto Congress that America has ever seen. So that's all very long, sort of great bullish signals. It also means that the US is going to be at the center of crypto and Web3 probably in this sort of presidency and maybe also beyond, because you can also see that crypto is becoming much more of a bipartisan issue. So it's not only that Republicans basically won because of that, but also Democratic seats were basically saved essentially, or won on the basis of being pro-crypto too. But the Trump token, of course, is one where you could say that short term, while trust inside the industry is somewhat bullish, because if the president can do this, then anyone can do this type of thing, right? But it does take away a little bit that air of seriousness. And I think the bigger issue for people in our industry, like you poll them, the vast majority would say this is not a good thing for us.
Yeah.
However,
I mean, just to double click on that.
Yeah.
For people who aren't crypto fans,
Yes.
who don't have a big crypto wallet, for people like my mom who might be watching,
Yes.
so the meme coins, they're just pure speculation. So how can this be good?
Yeah, so it's for speculative purposes. But the one way to look at meme coins is also, it's a way of bringing attention to you.
Okay.
So I think of meme coins, they are speculative, but I think of meme coins as an indicator of where the attention lies. So to me, it's like an open poly market. So if people suddenly love cats and dogs, and then there's a cat and dog, or like a dog, like Doge, for instance, type of token, then the attention that is driven from that comes from the fact that it's part of the zeitgeist. So it's not like a bet like you do in poly market, hey, who's going to win, or is it left or is it right? But it's more like an open market way of saying, where's our attention? Which, by the way, is what social media used to do. Like, for instance, there's a TikTok post that blows up, right?
Yeah.
The only difference is it doesn't have a financial element to that, because you can't trade it. You can't trade that attention. But in Web3, as a meme coin, you can trade that attention. And one could also argue, because Trump, most powerful man in the world, and certainly in everyone's agenda, the fact that he launched a meme coin that at one point peaked at around $60 or $70 billion fully diluted value, which also means that the president has most of his net worth in crypto now, at least at that moment in time, is sort of, again, a bullish signal for the industry, but I guess not a good signal broadly in terms of trying to take it more seriously. If you're an institution somewhere around the world and you're like, okay, what's this? Should I take this seriously? I don't understand this. It leaves more questions and then gives answers. So my message to the president is that he should actually donate his proceeds at a good give, and he would then go down in history as the most generous president ever to have existed. Wouldn't that be great?
Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah, wishful thinking, but if he does, and if he happens to hear this, or his advisors, I would definitely advise him to do something good with it for his legacy.
Interesting. So besides meme coins, besides the Trump and Melania coins, what are you most excited in crypto about right now?
Well, first of all, institutional adoption is really on the rise. The state of the market, we're about $3.6 to $3.8 trillion in size. Because America is getting very pro-crypto, it means also the rest of the world has to be looking at adopting it as well, just to be able to transact. If I want to send you a transaction in crypto and your local country regulation doesn't have a way of dealing with it, then I can't do business with America. So I see that happening in a very rapid way. By the way, that's the reason why a lot of companies, in the early days of the internet, adopted email. And that's also why people adopted fax machines, because they were trying to do business with America, and that was the way of communication that they had to adopt. And so this is just another form of communication, just happens to be financial in nature. So I think that's really a bullish signal. The other thing is that more and more countries are talking about putting Bitcoin on their reserve. Whether this is relevant or not is almost kind of sort of irrelevant, because it's the part of the conversation. It's now treat it really as that type of commodity that is valuable, or maybe as a hedge. I think I just also recently saw, I think, an interview with Ray Dalio very briefly. He wasn't commenting on exactly how much Bitcoin he had, but he had Bitcoin.
Right.
And he was saying that,
Right.
he's doing it as a way to, I guess, hedge himself. And again, we're talking about investing legends who were maybe skeptical or weren't touching this type of stuff, are now actually holding that asset. And Bitcoin is a reserve asset of Web3. So if Bitcoin does well, everything in Web3 rises. So it's many reasons to be bullish. And of course, there's a competitive aspect, because for a while, America was very much retreating from that space. And now when they're opening up, everyone else is looking to sort of compete with them and basically do better in some ways. So that means places like Hong Kong and UAE and Singapore and Japan and all these places are now, which were actually ahead of America in terms of a lot of regulatory frameworks, are now having to think of how can we be better or more ahead. And actually, I think that's a healthy sort of a country dynamic to have, because that's better for entrepreneurial business. It's better for people who want to build business in space. So anyway, very, very positive. Super excited about digital identity. As you said, Davos is was a subject of trust. But what's the best way to actually ensure trust? Blockchain. I think for a lot of people, when they look at the speculation, they say, oh, but how can you trust that? It's not the speculative aspect that we need to think about.
I mean, we have to differentiate,
Exactly.
right, between crypto and blockchain.
Yes.
So crypto is a use case.
Yes.
Blockchain is the technology, is the way.
Correct,
to build
exactly. But also when you think about collateral, for instance, if I have Bitcoin or stable coins, right? And this is a fun fact that when it was commented on Davos, that a lot of people were shocked. Tether, which is a stable coin, US dollars, has more treasury bills than the Japanese government, right? And at $97 billion. So just to give you an idea of just how large this industry is and what impact it has, I think a lot of people are just coming to grasp and to grips about sort of what impact this industry actually has, right? So these just some stats around it. But to your point also, it's not just blockchain, it's the fact that crypto has value in the form of stablecoins and can post collateral and can prove that you can transact into business, because you can see my collateral, as opposed to I need a bank to give a letter of credit, or maybe I'm meeting you for the first time and do I actually know that you have the resources that you claim to have? These are kind of things that you can now also do in blockchain. So it doesn't just build trust in terms of the technology, knowing that it's an immutable transaction. It also shows that maybe you have the resources or the means to do business in a certain manner or fashion. Right? And I think that's been the basis of DeFi. I have collateral, I can post, I can do something, I can trade. And that's actually, this transparency is very positive. So blockchain is about sort of transparency. And I think digital identity, which I think is the next big wave in this space, is going to help encourage more of that.
So just looking at that specific issue around digital identity, it has been the kind of great promise, and I wonder if I could put it in the sense of the Magnificent Seven, whatever you want to call them, the big technology companies that are taking all our data that we'd actually really like to be paid for. I heard one statistic yesterday that actually we're all worth about $50,000 in terms of just our own data. But we're giving it away every day for the price of a coffee, for the price of a look at a website.
Or for nothing, really.
Right?
Just to be able to engage with our own friends.
Right?
Yes.
And so tell me how close we are to getting digital identity as a sense of getting paid for that data.
Okay, so in our industry, this sort of getting paid for it is typically known as airdrops. And the stat for 24, which wasn't the best year for crypto, over $15 billion worth of airdrops was paid to users who helped build the networks in these blockchain ecosystems. That's $15 billion, right? And over the collective period, it's actually in excess of 37 billion over the last 4 years. So that kind of gives you an idea. Now think about which creator economy, whether it's a Spotify or even an Instagram, has paid out anything close to that. And the answer is none. Right? So that's actually the demonstration of what's actually happening. And how it does that is because when you're adding value to the network through a token, I can represent value that I can basically pay you for that activity. And this is really what we think the future will look like. So airdrops are going to be a bigger business even because they're really flipping advertising on its head. Advertising has been typically the way you would gain attention. But now, if I pay you a token, that's another way to get attention, and it's actually giving money to the people that you actually want to attract, right? So that's what happens there. And now, how do you ensure that you can prove that as your data? Well, it's blockchain. I know I'm doing this activity. I can prove it. It's immutable. And it's owned by the network. It's not owned by one company who can change the rules of the game. So the most important thing to understand about how trust is being built is that when there are rules to the game, they are consistent. This is, by the way, the basis of our economy. That's why we have a judiciary system. That's why you know that, hey, if I do something bad, then I get sent to jail. Therefore, I don't do something bad. And we can have trust in an economy, right? And those lines are getting more and more blurred, especially when you go to places where people can just decide who gets to go, who doesn't. But in blockchain, the rules are immutable, right? And the first levels of blockchain were basic immutability, like I gave you this transaction, and that's the immutable part. So the proof is there. However, more and more blockchains are getting more sophisticated about the type of rules they put in. And because it's open, everyone knows the rules of the game. And so when you know the rules of the game, that's actually how you can build trust and reliability on a framework that then builds these economies. And there's a reason why blockchain today is a $3.6 trillion space.
Extraordinary. So I wonder what you see now are the biggest investment opportunities. What are you looking at in particular?
I mean, at Animoca, we have over 540 portfolio investments already today, but the themes we really like for this year, we're very bullish for gaming in the latter half of the year. In fact, we think events like GTA 6 are going to trigger very much excitement and momentum in the space.
Where's that?
GTA 6 is basically a big game.
Right.
But they're also going to use AI and so on, and it's something that the rest of the industry, I think, will rally around in terms of consumer interest. But of course, agentic AI is a really big deal. And this is the other thing as well. A lot of people are talking about AI in the context of what it can do for me. You know, I chat GPT, Perplexity, I search, I do stuff, very powerful stuff, right? However, the thing that we're seeing in blockchain, which is a little bit ahead already, is that people are working for AI. Because what's the difference between you getting an airdrop from a platform versus getting an airdrop from an AI? And the answer is actually nothing. So that means that you're already working on these. And the agentic AI space in Web3 is actually now a roughly $13 billion space. And again, it's interesting how it's like a parallel universe. So, you know, the ones who are dealing AI in one area aren't even looking at that. And then the ones in Web3 are looking at that, plus using technologies in Web2 to create these kind of frameworks. So agentic AI, we're very excited about education, but we are, I would say, one of the early pioneers. So I wouldn't say it's a theme necessarily that's just going to be for this year. But for instance, you know, we're solving student loans with DeFi, right? Creating basically better yield on one hand and lower interest rates for students. And happy to say that Open Campus has already essentially supported 1 million students on this activity, right?
Wow.
Right? So again, real impact is happening. And by the way, that's kind of what I want people to talk about in the blockchain industry, like how it's affecting basically regular people's improving their lives, right? And which is the potential, and is actually what blockchain can do. You know, how it's basically created financial inclusion and literacy in the places like Africa and Philippines and so on, right? These are all themes that happen. But I think so many people don't know about this yet. And I think we need to keep evangelizing.
Finally, you mentioned AI agents. When do you think we will see the first unicorn companies, one person supported by AI agents?
I'll go one deeper. I would argue that we're going to hit an AI agent that hits unicorn status as the agent in itself. And now, it's well possible that the agent might be owned by someone, but kind of a little bit of a Wizard of Oz-ish moment in AI. Or it could be owned by a DAO, which is kind of what I like, you know, because then you have at least some kind of control. But I think we'll hit, you know, a token unicorn in sort of agentic AI this year.
All right. Yeah. Well, we're going to get you back next year and see if that came true. I bet it will. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having
that incredible deep dive into blockchain and crypto. We'll be back in just a moment. We're going to look more at trust and data with our next guest. continuing our theory or our discussions around trust. Really delighted now to have Lauren Woodman, CEO of DataKind, leveraging AI for social good. So I introduced us talking about trust. That seems to have been the theme of this entire show, if not this entire Davos. I wonder, you've done a lot of work on this, and in particular around how you can trust what you know based on the data that you have. How good is our data?
That's a great question. And it's one that I think varies widely. And I think that all of us really believe, that with data, we can better understand the world around us. We can model interventions to improve our community, and we can act with some greater confidence. We think that's really important, and especially, in the nonprofits and the social impact sector in which I work, having that level of visibility and increased confidence leads to better outcomes and greater impact. But all of that is based on that underlying data. And, a big part of trusting that data is knowing that that data reflects me, reflects the community that I live in. And not, just at a broad geographical level, but really the nuances and characteristics of the community in which I live, how we act, how we behave, the things that we want. Does that data really capture what my community looks like if we're going to use that data to make decisions on behalf of my community or for my community? And so that's one of the places that we've leaned into over the last year. Had the pleasure to work through the forum with academics and corporate partners and philanthropic organizations to say, what does data equity really look like in today's world? And it's not an easy question to solve.
You can't change what you can't measure, right? And I think what you're saying, if I can interpret it in my own words, is that we may have data for rich white people in a lot of places. We may not have data for poorer communities of whatever color, right? So let's take a couple of examples and make it real. I know that you've done a lot of work in education in the States. Tell me about that and what that data is showing us and what it impacts, what impacts and changes have been made.
So one of the things I think that data allows us to do is to, as I said, get a really good understanding of what's happening and then act. So we did some work with John Jay College as part of the CUNY system in New York a couple of years ago, who were really looking at how do they best support students at staying in school and completing their education. There's nothing worse than getting to a semester or two away from graduation and then not finishing it. And so what were the factors that were impacting whether or not students were able to go all the way through? And so we built a model. They started using that model. That model helped their advisors, the people that students interacted with, just get a better viewpoint as to all of their advisees. Each advisor deals with hundreds of students. There's no way that they can stay on top of everything. And so it would help them understand which students might need a little support. What happened, though, was John Jay then improved its graduation rates 32% in 2 years. And what's remarkable about that is they've stayed up, and they've actually continued to go up, and their class sizes, their graduating class sizes, have gone up every year subsequently. What that told us was really understanding that community helped. And so now we're working with our
What were
partners.
the questions that made the biggest difference? What were the data points?
It varies. I mean, it really does vary. And it's been interesting to talk to those advisors and the school administrators over the years. They had one student who had been a very good student. You look at things like grades and class participation and, all sorts of things. And that student had been an A student all throughout, had fallen to being a B student. And instead of being in class 100% of the time, was now in class 80% of the time, or something that would still, frankly, in a broad system, wouldn't trigger anything.
Right.
But for that student, it was different. And what had happened was that student had lost his mother, and he was having to work a second job, and so school was becoming difficult, and the school was able to step in and said, we actually have emergency funds. We can help solve some of these challenges. He did, and he finished his education.
Incredible.
But in a system that doesn't reflect that community, doesn't reflect that individual, you never would have noticed that. And that kid, who knows what might have happened.
Interesting. What about on the international front? I know you've done some work around humanitarian response.
One of the things that's really important in humanitarian response is getting good information very quickly that is actionable. That's great, and there's lots of good data out there. The UN does a phenomenal job at pulling together data, but accessing that data when a crisis is right in front of you is really hard. And so one of the things we've done is built something called the Humanitarian Data Insights Project, which essentially uses generative AI and a natural language interface to let humanitarians just ask the question, tell me what's going on with floods in Nigeria. tell me what the populations are and where they're located. What's the gender disaggregation of those populations that are being impacted by floods so I know what kind of services to provide. Making that information accessible quickly, reliably, knowing
in real time.
And in real time, and knowing where it came from so you can trust that data is really critical. Those are the kinds of solutions that we see, and letting nonprofits who have trust in communities, who have worked there for years, who really understand the world around them and now want to be able to use data to get better impact, that's exactly what we want to see happen.
You do a lot of work with government, so we've got a new administration in the United States. I wonder what you are looking forward to or what you're a little nervous about.
Well, I think, anytime there's change, we're all nervous.
Right.
And I think that's true whether it's technology change or administration changes or, I don't know, my kid's going off to college.
Right.
That kind of change always, worries us all a little bit. I do think that one of the things that's been, encouraging is there's a real recognition that, technology is important.
Huge investment into AI.
Huge investment into AI.
That was one of his first
That was one of his first things, and we'll see where that goes. I was at a breakfast earlier this week about where AI for scientific research is going, and that's just incredible to see the progress that's being made there. So I'm optimistic that we as a country, and not just us, but frankly everybody, but we as a country will continue to innovate. That having been said, I think one of the things that's most important, and I spend a lot of time working about, is how does what we create here actually impact everyone, and especially in the global South, where those technologies can have tremendous impact. How do we make sure that we continue that type of work? How do we continue to prioritize that equity and closing the digital divide so that we can avoid crises in the future because we just didn't do the things that, frankly, we knew we needed to do.
Lauren, thank you so much for stopping by the Hub Culture Morning News Show here on Thursday. It's Davos at Hub Culture. I'm Edie Lush. We'll see you this evening for our evening show at 4 o'clock Central European Time.